Hello students, and welcome to the third part in our Renewable Energy Lecture Series. Tonight we're going to be doing part 3, hydropower, wind, and geothermal power. So kind of a large load. All right, so we're going to start with hydropower. And hydropower, I like the bottom picture because it's animated. Hydropower is pretty straightforward. You're using potential energy of that stored water dropping from some height, and it converts to kinetic energy as it falls. And that kinetic energy then turns the turbine that makes your electricity. This is different from nearly every other type of power generation we've looked at so far, in that we're not using steam to turn a turbine. We're using falling water, that's spinning water, to turn the turbine. So hydropower is a bit different than most of our other energy power plants. There's no heat, large amount of heat generated in this process. So there's a few different ways to have hydropower. One is to actually build a dam to hold that water back behind to create that height difference. There's a second way that we have right in our state, and that is to use a natural waterfall to make your hydroelectric power. All right, and we have that right here. You can just drive half an hour out of town and go to Snoqualmie Falls. And what's really cool, it's 270 feet tall. And the first hydropower plant was one of the very first in the country, built in 1898. And it was the first completely underground one. If you look at the very far right of the picture over there, you will see the outlet for tunnel number 1. There are 2 tunnels that divert some of this water before it goes over the falls, and it lets it drop through a tunnel. And at the very bottom of that vertical tunnel is a turbine that makes the electricity. I was lucky enough to get a tour of this hydropower plant when I first started teaching this AP class, and I went to the AP Institute. There is a second tunnel built on the other side that you actually walk over if you hike to the bottom of the falls. All right, so power is about 16,000 homes. And again, that's at the time when the falls are running high. By fall, when there's not a whole lot of water going over the falls, I don't think we get much hydropower from it. It's very old though, so not very efficient. All right, and then if you want to talk about big scale hydro plants, hydropower projects, the Grand Coulee Dam, also in Washington State. It was built during the Depression era years, and as part of the works to get people back to work. And it's 550 feet high. It required a whole lot of concrete, and it's the 4th largest hydro plant in the world. I think it still holds that. There's other hydropower plants out there that are huge. Anyway, this one provides enough electricity for 2.3 million households in 11 different states. So at the times of year when there's a huge amount of water flowing over in the Columbia River, we can make more electricity than we can use, and we can sell it to other states. And then again, as the water levels drop, we don't make as much. But just realize that to divert all the water from a river to build a dam is a non-trivial undertaking. So the infrastructure that you need for hydropower is quite large. All right, and then you want to go really huge scale. You can go to the Three Gorges Dam in China. So they built it on the Yangtze River. It's 607 feet high. It's really long. They had to flood a whole lot of towns, so they had to basically evacuate a whole lot of towns before they flooded them. We've done this in our country too with a lot of our dams along the Colorado River. We flooded old Native American sites, etc. So it's one of the downsides of building hydropower plants, is that everything upstream gets flooded when you create that lake. They said that in addition to providing the needed energy, it's going to help control flooding downstream. This is so large though that it's actually triggered the earthquakes, a few like small earthquakes from the weight of the water. And people, there are some it's possible maybe to go too big. All right, but look at 18,200, and that's megawatts. That's huge. All right, so hydropower production, we're 4th in the world for hydropower production. The Columbia River Basin provides 44% of the US's hydroelectric capacity. So again, that's right in our very own state. Norway gets the highest percentage of their electricity from hydropower. So this is top generating countries, Norway. And you can see we're down here. If you look at states, you need a couple of things for hydropower. You need water, obviously, but you also need elevation changes. So where I come from in Chicago, hydropower is not going to be a thing because it is very, very flat in Illinois. So where do we get our hydropower? Which states? Idaho, Oregon, South Dakota, there's Washington. That's where your hydropower plants are going to be. So states that get enough rainfall, states that have big elevation changes. And I put this little picture in here because just realize we've had hydropower for quite a long time. We used to do it to do things like grind wheat into flour, but to make electricity from it is a newer innovation. All right, so what are your pros and cons of hydropower? So no greenhouse gases, that's great. We get high net energy yields once you build the plant. So it's well developed, inexpensive, and again, once it's in place, building the dam itself and putting it in is like a big project. Cons: you're going to flood your upstream habitats, towns, whatever's up there, and you're going to alter your downstream habitats. In some places where they've put in dams, downstream habitats no longer get needed water or farmland, etc., and then they might go into drought because they no longer have that river water reaching them. They interfere with fish runs, which is why we've taken a few out in our state. The salmon have become endangered, and it's hard. You can build fish ladders, but it's not the same as just having an open river. You need a lot of water and a lot of elevation change. Again, so you can't use it everywhere. We could never replace all of our fossil fuels in this country with hydropower. So water supplies are often seasonal. So again, even in the state where we have the elevation changes and we get a lot of rainfall, by fall, we're able to generate a lot less electricity than we can in the spring. And then when you have those dams, like on the Colorado River in the Southwest, and you make those big dams like Lake Mead behind the dams, you're losing an awful lot of water to evaporation. So now the water is not going downstream to those ecosystems. You can't even use it to make your hydropower. All of that water lost to evaporation is just lost. All right, so new ideas. What's going on? This actually is going on in Portland, Oregon. We have flowing water in areas that are not rivers, like our sewer pipes. So if you're going to be flowing all the water that you flush down your toilets and run out of your sinks and showers, et cetera, and it's going to be flowing at fairly high velocity to that wastewater treatment plant, why not spin turbines with it and make electricity? So this seems like a pretty cool idea. I have a few concerns. You flush other things down your toilet besides water, and I'm talking about things like wipes and whatnot. And so could these turbines in there get gummed up with stuff over time? I don't know. Portland's trying it out. Seems like a cool idea. We send a lot of our wastewater through pumps and whatnot just to get it to the wastewater treatment plant too. So there's other places where things can gum up the system. So, you know, as long as they think this can work without getting plugged, I think this is a really cool idea. All right, so more ways to produce electricity from water. What about using the tides? So the idea is that the tides come and go twice a day, every day, and why not harness that to make electricity? So you see a picture down here in this lower right where you would have them spaced far enough apart that ships could get through, and as the tides came in, you'd spin turbines, and as the tides went out, you would spin turbines. So again, it would not be a 24/7 source of electricity, but again, if that water is going to flow, whether or not you harness its energy, why not harness it? So pros: no greenhouse gas emissions, and yeah, I mean it's an energy source that's there. So I should say also that tides are free. Cons: it's new and developing. We still don't really have this down. It's not being used in a whole lot of places yet. There's not a whole lot of areas. We're one of the few that have enough wave or tidal energy to do this, but you know, there are enough around the planet that you could put it in those places that could use it. This is more important, or more of a con in my mind, in that there's this law of conservation of energy, which means you can't create it or destroy it. So if you're taking out some of the energy with these turbines, it means that when that water reaches the coastline at those intertidal zones, it may not have as much energy as it did before, and there might be some unintended consequences, the ecosystems that depend on that tidal water and the energy from that tidal water. So if you're taking it out here, you're removing it from someplace it used to go. Limited useful areas, again, I mentioned that. And then, you know, a lot of areas where there are tides, they're just not moving fast enough. So places like Deception Pass, where we get really fast moving tides, would be a good place, but other areas in Puget Sound where the water doesn't move very fast, it would not be a whole lot of energy. All right, so people are scaling this up though. So this is really cool looking. Wales is planning this plant that's going to power 155,000 homes for 120 years. It's going to employ a nearly 6-mile-long barrier wall that will enclose water in an artificial tidal lagoon. So people are working on these things. And again, I like to put these kind of new technologies, solutions in this lecture, just to kind of show you what people are creative, and people are coming up with a lot of ideas on how to do these things. So anyway, as the tide goes out, the water in that lagoon will be as much as 27 feet higher than the water outside its walls. And then they can use that water to turn turbines. So that pressure created, they're going to force it through the turbines, make electricity. All right, so again, that's like a lot of water. So this is a pretty cool idea. It looks like it would be quite expensive to build. All right, and then waves. People are looking at wave energy. So again, waves are out in the ocean. Wave energy is wind generated, and that wind is solar generated. So can you use the waves and have things that bob up and down with the waves. And as it bobs up and down, it could spin it, like it could generate a current. And you can see one type of wave plant down here. You have different kind of envisions of what these wave plants could look like, and they are being built. So what are the pros? No greenhouse gas emissions. Waves go all the time. As long as the waves are large enough, you can be making that electricity. So again, it's not going to be 24/7 all the time, but it can run at night, which, like, say, solar power can't. Doesn't disturb nearshore ecosystems or animals. You could put these things way far offshore, and then you wouldn't worry about, you know, disturbing like the tidal ecosystems, et cetera. So what are some cons? Waves are often seasonal. When I did oceanography work, the work had to be done between May and October, and even October was sketchy because otherwise the waves are too big out off our coast. So, but the opposite would be true then for wave energy, in that we may not get a whole lot of wave energy off the coast of Washington State from May to October, when you can actually do the oceanographic work. So you have to get that energy to shore. So that transmission, those cables would have to be laid to somehow pipe that energy to shore. And again, how many areas are going to have significant wave action where you could really harness this? So again, cool idea, not usable everywhere and not all the time. All right, so let's move on to wind power. I took this picture in Paris, realized we've had wind power for a long time, but again, it used to be used to do things like drive a mill to grind your wheat into flour. This is what we do with wind now. So pros of wind power: unlimited source at favorable sites. So we'll take a look at some of those. Moderate to high net energy yields. It's that once you build the turbine, you're pretty much good to go. Easy to build and expand. You can put up one turbine and expand over time. You don't put out greenhouse gases. And you can also double use the land. So if these turbines are sitting high off the ground, you can graze sheep or whatnot underneath there. So you can use that land for more than one thing. You can grow crops, you could graze farm animals, etc. So where do we have wind? It turns out that downwind of mountains, and in the United States, wind blows from west to east generally. So where you have, where you come out of mountains is where you're going to be getting a lot of wind. So Eastern Washington is good, Idaho is good, and all of these states that are downwind of the Rocky Mountains, the air goes up over the Rockies, and as it comes rushing down out of the mountains, you get a lot of wind. It also helps if you have nice flat open land where that wind can just blow without anything stopping it. So biggest potential for wind energy is in our heartland right here. All right, so what's another place that's really windy? Offshore. We get these offshore winds that come and go every day. And so putting wind turbines offshore is another place where we get high winds a lot of the year. So the winds are less turbulent at offshore sites. They're often more consistent than winds coming, say, off the mountains of the Rockies. But a lot of people who have lots of money live on coastal areas, and a lot of people don't like the idea of having to look at windmills when they look out at the ocean. So there's been lawsuits, people trying to block the building of wind turbines out in the ocean, because if they have their home on the ocean, they don't want to look out at them. I kind of don't understand that, because I think they're beautiful. I think they're really cool looking. But, you know, if I had $1 million home on the ocean, I would be happy to look out at wind turbines, but that's me. All right, so cons from wind. So it's only economical in areas where you get steady winds. So so again, the grid, it's hard to transport electricity really long distances. So really this is useful. It can be useful in those heartland states, Eastern Washington, where we can actually make the electricity or get those winds. You're gonna need backup sources, because winds, even in the windiest places, winds don't blow year round, like all the time. You cannot count on wind energy. So while it's a great source of supplemental energy, and it can actually provide quite a lot, the inconsistency of wind is going to be a problem. You will always need backup sources. So mass production takes up a lot of land space. If you've ever seen some of these wind farms, like, it's a lot of area. And California has some huge ones. Like, you can just drive and it's like one hillside after another. And then they do make some noise, and birds can fly into them. So that's kind of sad too. So they can, I don't know how many birds are killed by wind turbines, but I think it's not insignificant. All right, let's move on to geothermal. So geothermal is one of those non-solar sources of energy because we get it from the heat within the earth. And if you see a geothermal plant, it looks a lot like a nuclear power plant, except instead of using radioactive stuff to make your electricity, you're using heat from the earth. So the steam comes right from, you basically drill a well down in there and you can pipe that water, and that steam will actually then generate your electricity from your plant, just the same way that the steam is generated in a nuclear plant or a coal plant, natural gas plant, etc. So this Iceland is one of the best places for geothermal power because Iceland is a big volcano. Like the whole place is volcanic. Like Iceland is only there because it's a volcano. It sits right on the mid-Atlantic ridge and it's a hotspot. So they have more geothermal energy than they know what to do with if they can harness it. All right, so in our country, where are we going to have our geothermal? East Coast, not so much. It's not really volcanic. Do you know a single volcano in the eastern half of the United States? No. So our geothermal resources are going to be in the western states where we do have volcanoes and where we do have hot springs, etc. So all of our geothermal would be more of a western United States sort of a thing. All right, so what are the pros of geothermal energy? No greenhouse gas emissions, plentiful supply if you're in a volcanic area, moderate net energy yields if you, once you build your plant. So, and unlike like wind, like I just mentioned, you can run these 24/7. What are the cons of geothermal energy? Because they sound like a pretty good deal to me. You've got it, the heat has to be close to the surface for it to be really useful. So you do need to be in a volcanic area. Unfortunately, in our country, think of our volcanic areas. There are national parks, they're in our mountains. A lot of these are not accessible sites or they're not sites we really want to be putting a geothermal plant on. I don't really want a geothermal plant sticking out of the side of Mount Rainier, you know, so that's a kind of a big con. Also, if you draw out the water too quickly, you can cause sinkholes. You can cause the land to sink. So you got to be careful that you're not taking out the water faster than natural systems can replenish it. And yeah, again, going to be expensive, except in the areas where it's most concentrated. So I think Iceland should definitely be developing as much geothermal as they can. There are certain areas in the United States that are great for geothermal energy, but there's a lot of our most volcanic areas are just not that accessible. All right, so this is Miller's trade-offs. You can go to your textbook to look at those, so I'm not going to focus on these. They mentioned a few that I don't. Yes, it's smelly, but you know that those odors are coming out whether or not we take the energy. I'm not going to focus on this slide. So there's something else called geothermal heat pumps, though, not to be confused with geothermal electricity. And I mentioned this in the last lecture too, but can you run pipes underneath the ground? And you can do it in cooling mode, in that when it's really hot, you can disperse your heat underneath ground. You can also heat your house, say if it's like 20 degrees outside, but underneath your house, it's like constant 50 degrees. You can actually help heat your home with the geothermal heat pumps too. So heat pumps are really cool. The downside of using the geothermal where you have those buried pipes is you have to bury the pipes. So again, if you're building a house from scratch and you're already tearing up a property to like put in the foundation for your basement, and if you ever seen a construction of a new house site, why not put the pipes in? It would be fairly economical. If you already have a house and you want to put in pipes, you're looking at tearing up a big hole in your yard, and just it would be a lot less economical and a lot more disruptive. All right, so that's the end of Energy Lecture Part 3. We have one more part, and that will be the end of our Renewable Energy series.